Chapter 6. Nate McDaniel scowled as he watched two of his people working cautiously in the heat and glare of the big outdoor lights. I don't have to be an expert to know that this body has been in the ground a long time, he said. Years at least. According to the head gardener, Quentin said, there used to be a lot more topsoil in this area, with only a foot or so of the largest boulder sticking out. That would have been at least 10 years ago. By the time the garden extended to include it just a couple years ago, they decided to use the boulders as part of the scheme and just plant a few hardy flowers. Which I suppose at least partly explains why no one knew there was a grave here. Quentin shrugged. I honestly don't remember spending any time here over the years. It's too far from the main building and stables to have interested me as a kid. And 5 years ago, when Bishop and I helped in the search for that little girl, the gardens had already been covered by the staff and your people. Yeah, Christ, I wonder what else we missed. Quentin shook his head. How many acres of gardens are there? 20? 30? Plus the rest of the valley and all the mountain bridle trails. Worse than a needle in a haystack. Maybe if the search dog had been able to work, he'd have found it. Maybe. In any case, it's at least it's inside the fence, protected from predators and scavengers in the mountains. So the bones may tell a forensics expert a lot. I mean, other than the two facts we can be pretty damn sure of, that this was a child and that the cause of death was probably decapitation. I don't have to be an expert to see that either. DNA for identification, Quentin said. Dental records are often unreliable when it comes to kids. Once the age of the remains is determined, we'll have to get a sample from a family member of every child reported missing in the area within the right time frame. Shit. Nate followed that wary curse by adding, and how did she say she found it? Quentin glanced to one side, where Diana sat on a bench made of slabs of granite, and watched the work going on a few yards away. He hadn't been willing to return to her cottage, except briefly to grab a jacket when he had insisted. She was still clearly upset, but she had said very little. You heard her, he said to the cop. She was walking out here, leaned against that boulder, and happened to look down. Maybe the storm earlier today, or the ones last week, washed away enough of the topsoil and gravel to expose what had been buried here. The top of the skull looked different enough from all the rocks to catch her attention. It sure as hell caught mine. And then she went to you. She knew I was an FBI agent. Nate shook his head, but more another wary gesture than negation. This is a hell of a thing. I know you always suspected that at least some of the missing kids on that list of yours had been murdered, but this is the first time we found anything to support that. According to that list of mine, there are 3 unsolved disappearances of children from this general area in the last 20 years. 4 if you count a supposed runaway. Okay, so maybe you were right to believe something was going on here. Maybe. Quentin, we have an undoubted murder 25 years ago. The killer never caught. No question about that. And we have the skeleton, which may or may not be identified as one of the missing kids, but there are other missing kids, missing adults as well. You say. And I'm not saying I don't believe you. It's just that in most of those old cases you've dug up, official reports were never filed, or if they were, there was every reason to believe the disappearances could be explained in ordinary ways. Estranged parents taking their kids, runaways, and then there's the mountains. You know as well as I do, it's damn easy to get lost up there and virtually impossible to find somebody who has. Yes, I know that. I know there have been wanted fugitives, federal fugitives, who disappeared into these mountains for years, despite exhaustive efforts to find them. And some of them were never seen or heard from again. But there's something more, something going on here at the lodge. Nate shook his head again, but said, well, after this you may have a better argument to use in persuading the hotel's management that taking a look at their records is in order. But I don't think a judge is going to force them if they say no, especially if we can't connect this child to the lodge. He, or she, was buried here. It's enough of a connection for me. Yep, I had a feeling you were going to say that. Nate sighed as he watched his people work. He zipped his jacket, adding a muttered, "When did it get so cold?" Quentin could have answered 25 years ago, but he didn't, of course. He just waited silently while Nate's people worked to uncover bones buried years in the ground. Madison knew she wasn't supposed to be in the garden, in any of the gardens, now that the police were here. Her mama sure wouldn't like it, she knew that, but she was too curious to stay away, and small enough to slip unseen through the gardens until she was within sight of what was happening. "They found Jeremy," Becca said. Madison held Angelo close to make sure he didn't start whimpering and said to her friend, "They're digging up bones." "Uh-huh, that's Jeremy." Madison frowned at her. "If he's just bones, how come you know him?" "He isn't just bones. That's all they see, though. All of them except her." Becca nodded toward the pretty lady sitting on a rock bench off to the side. "She saw Jeremy when he wasn't just bones?" "Uh-huh. He wanted them to find him, so he showed her where he was." She nodded as though to herself, adding thoughtfully, "I expect he was ready to leave." "Leave the lodge? He's been here a long time." Madison asked, "Have you been here a long time, Becca?" "Yeah, I guess." Becca gazed off toward the police officers working in the very bright light and added wistfully, "It used to be okay, really. Still is sometimes. But mostly now it's just scary." "Because of what you told me? What's coming?" Becca nodded. "It's been here before, and it keeps coming back." "Why?" "Because they don't know how to stop it. They can't stop something they can't see, something they don't believe in." "But you believe in it." "I have to, don't I?" Madison thought about that, absently hugging her small dog close as she watched the grown-ups working. Then, slowly, she said, "The lady who saw Jeremy could probably see it, probably believe it, don't you think?" Maybe she could." Becca turned her head and looked back at Madison. "Maybe that's why she's here, but she'll have to hurry." Tracing the movements of a kid after years, how lucky would we have to be to find out anything at all about whatever led up to his death? Nate swore under his breath. "And we're starting cold with shit for leads." "Pretty much." Quentin couldn't help glancing toward Diana even as he spoke. Nate was paying attention. "Or do we maybe have a little more than that? What's her story, Quentin? Did she really just stumble over the skull?" "She didn't tell me any more than she told you about that." "About that? What else did she tell you?" Nate lowered his voice. "Is she gifted too? Psychic?" Quentin was a little surprised that the cop asked the question openly, but he barely hesitated before replying, "In her case, it's more of a curse than a gift, and not one she's happy with or knows how to use effectively. She might be able to help us, but she's just as likely to join the dozen or so guests already packing up and leaving." Momentarily distracted, Nate said, "I heard one of them tell the manager that he couldn't afford this sort of publicity, and he sounded real nervous about it. I guess the others are leaving for the same reason, 'cause they're afraid to find themselves in the middle of a media nightmare, especially if they have secrets or indiscretions of their own to hide." "Probably. The lodge's reputation for discretion is a strong lure for plenty of people looking for a private, stress-free vacation. This, especially if we find more, is just the thing to really screw that up. When word gets out that 2 children were murdered here, even if years apart, the media's not going to ignore it. Then again, this place is so remote, and the locals are so accustomed to minding their own business, I'm not at all sure it will get out, anytime soon at least. Plus, the lodge is one of the largest employers in the area," Nate finished for him. "People around here have a vested interest in minding their own business. You've always thought that, haven't you?" He was matter-of-fact rather than offended, largely because he believed the same thing and understood the mindset, having grown up in leisure. "It's been obvious, even after I found brief mentions in the leisure newspaper morgue of various accidents and disappearances over the years I could never follow up. Nobody seemed to know anything. Nobody seemed to remember or to want to talk about it. Whatever the excuse, the meaning was clear. Whatever happened at or near the lodge was not my business, and I've never had the legal authority to force the issue." "Hey, Captain." Nate and Quentin both stepped forward at the summons, joining the two officers who made up the Leisure Police Department's crime scene unit. Found something, Sally Chavez told them. Other than bones? Nate wanted to know. Yep, see for yourself. Kneeling, she leaned back so that both Nate and Quentin could do that. The skeleton, now half uncovered, and with the skull repositioned where it belonged, lay stretched out on its back, legs straight and arms at its side, as if it had been laid out carefully for burial. Quentin made a mental note of that, bothered by it, even though it wasn't particularly uncommon. Some killers took special care with the disposals of their victims, and some did not. Both men immediately saw what Chavez had invited them to see. A watch? Quentin bent closer. Yeah, Chavez said right wrist, so he may have been a southpaw. He? Nate asked. Guess, mostly from the watch, which looks like a guy type to me. From the size of the skeleton, this was a key, and gender is a lot more difficult to determine from skeletal remains, if death occurred before puberty. I don't see any obvious signs noting gender. What I can tell you is that the watch undoubtedly had a band made of some kind of material that must have rotted away. Clearly not metal, probably not plastic. That stuff lasts forever. That isn't really a child-sized watch, Quentin said. More of an adult watch she was meant to grow into. Maybe given for some sort of accomplishment. Nate grunted. I got one when I made Eagle Scout. Can we get a closer look? Quentin asked Chavez. Just a sec. Ryan, will you get me a few shots of the watch, please? Her partner, a silent young man, stopped brushing dirt away from the foot end of the skeleton long enough to pick up a nearby camera and take several pictures. Chavez carefully worked the half-buried watch loose with gloved hands, looked at it briefly, then slid it into a clear plastic bag and handed it up to her captain. Looks like we got lucky, she said. Quentin and Nate both straightened, and the latter said, looks like. The back is engraved. He was named MVP of his Little League team 10 years ago. Jeremy Grant. Quentin and Nate both turned startled as Diana spoke. She was standing several feet back, certainly not close enough to have been able to see the watch. Her face was tense, her voice a little shaky. That's what it says, isn't it? What's on the back of the watch? His name was Jeremy Grant. Quentin stepped toward her. Diana, just tell me. How the hell did you know? Nate demanded. Her gaze remained fixed on Quentin. Tell me. He had been advised to keep her grounded, and Quentin had the certain sense that right now it was a literal thing, that if he didn't provide an actual physical anchor for Diana, she would be gone, maybe in more ways than one. He crossed the space between them and took one of her cold hands in his. That's the name on the watch. He kept his voice low so no one else heard them, but also a matter of fact. You saw him? A little sound escaped her, not a laugh and not quite a sigh. Saw him? Oh, hell, I talked to him. Stephanie Boyd, manager of the lodge, had her hands full. Not only had a dozen of her guests checked out without hesitation as soon as the skeleton had been found in one of the gardens, but those who were left had been vocally unhappy about the situation. They wanted her to reassure them that this was a one-time unfortunate event, that the police would soon be gone, and that no media would get wind of it. So far, there had been no media that she knew of. She was crossing her fingers that continued. But who knew? And now she had a new worry. Captain, you can't be serious, she said to Nate McDaniel, trying hard to keep the dismay out of her voice. I'm sorry, Miss Boyd, but I am serious. He sounded serious. He also sounded frustrated. It may be a cold trail, but I have to treat this as an active murder investigation. We expect dental records and DNA will positively identify the remains as those of Jeremy Grant, age 8, when he disappeared from here at the lodge 10 years ago. His father worked here as a gardener at the time, but died himself of cancer a few years later. The mother relocated. We're trying to trace her now. You can't know that child was murdered on the grounds of the lodge, she heard herself objecting, or by anyone connected to this place. He was buried in the English garden, Miss Boyd. That wasn't part of the formal gardens then, Captain. No, but it was inside the fence, on the grounds of the lodge. She leaned back in her chair and stared at him across the desk. Her office felt more than usually small, with his rather large presence occupying it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you have no evidence, aside from the location of the remains, that this is in any way connected to the lodge. Miss Boyd? Make it Stephanie. Dryly she added, from the sound of things, we're going to be seeing quite a lot of each other, at least for a while. I'm afraid so, Stephanie. I'd like to be able to offer Jeremy Grant's mother more closure than just the information that her son was murdered. He paused, then added, and I'm Nate. She nodded rather absently. Just how do you mean to conduct an investigation into a 10-year-old crime? There are certainly a few long-time employees here who probably remember when the boy disappeared, but evidence? How can you possibly find anything after all this time? Nate didn't want to admit that the two aces he was counting on were one obsessive FBI agent with an even older murder to solve, and one fragile guest and maybe psychic who, if Nate was any judge, was about a whisper away from some kind of breakdown. So all he said was, we have to try, Miss Stephanie. Now, obviously, it'll be better if we can conduct our investigation and interviews as quietly as possible, which means keeping things inside the lodge as much as we can. We don't want to be transporting employees back and forth from here to the police department, do we? That has the nasty ring of a threat, Nate. He lifted both eyebrows. Not at all. Granted, without more evidence that I have that a crime was committed here, I don't have the legal authority to force you to turn over a room or cottage or other adequate space to me so that I can set up and conduct interviews here at the lodge. No, you don't. And after 10 years, I doubt a judge would grant you the right to do that. Nate kept his tone pleasant, but I doubt any judge in the county would forbid me to investigate this crime, especially given that it's the murder of a child. So you can have it one of two ways, Stephanie. Either I ferry employees back and forth in police cars from here to the station to be interviewed for however long that takes, or else you do set aside a space for us to do what we have to do quietly and discreetly here on the grounds of the lodge. She didn't like either of the alternatives, but she knew damn well she was stuck with them. Discarding her manager's hat for a moment, she said, you really believe that child was murdered here? Nate hesitated, then said, it gets worse. Another child was murdered here 25 years ago, and there could be more. What? Jesus. I guess they didn't tell you about any of that when they hired you. It wasn't a question. We didn't really discuss the history of the lodge. That history, anyway. 25 years ago. And you think that is related to this? Two murders that occurred 15 years apart? Nate sighed. It's reaching, I admit, but it's not unheard of for a serial killer to operate over that span of time. Even more startled and dismayed, she said again, Jesus, serial killer? Just a possibility, but one I have to investigate. Surely you see that. All I see is a hotel on the front page and empty of guests, she said. Then she grimaced. Sorry, I know that sounds callous, especially with children dead, but if this boy was killed 10 years ago and nothing like that has happened since, then... Nate hated to do this to her, but interrupted to say, in the last 25 years, we have here at the lodge or in the area 3 children dead of illness, 1 reported runaway, 2 so-called accidental deaths, 2 undoubted murders, counting what we found today, and 2 unsolved disappearances of children. We also have at least 2 adults who disappeared without a trace while they were staying here. It took a full minute before Stephanie could say how much of that happened since the little boy. Nate ran through the facts in his head, the ones Quentin had provided, and said slowly, 1 kid disappeared 9 years ago. 2 of the ones who died of illnesses died 6 and 8 years ago, and the runaway was 7 years ago. So, since Jeremy Grant disappeared, we have 4 kids dead or missing. You said some of them died of illnesses. Can't we discount those? I mean, you know what I mean. I know, and no, we can't discount them. I'm told in all 3 cases the attending doctor ascribed the deaths to some kind of fever, which is why the police weren't involved at the time. Wouldn't that fall under the definition of natural causes? Not necessarily. I'm also told some poisons would present that way. He was hoping she wouldn't ask who told him all this. Stephanie propped her elbows on her blotter, rubbed her face with both hands, and muttered, "Oh, shit." Nate felt more than a twinge of sympathy for her, helped along by the fact that she really was an attractive woman. He'd always had a soft spot for brown-eyed blondes, especially when they were nicely woman-shaped rather than absurdly thin, as fashion so often pushed them to be. And she wasn't wearing a wedding or engagement ring. As soon as those thoughts occurred, he reminded himself that his first marriage had ended badly and that he liked living alone and being unattached. He did. He was almost positive he did. But when she uncovered her face, he couldn't help but notice that her brown eyes were both intelligent and humorous, even now. "So, Nate, you seriously believe that we might have a serial child killer who's been operating here at the lodge, or at least in the area, for the past 25 years? He yanked his mind back to work, hesitated, and said, "I believe it's possible. And to complicate your life even more, you have a guest staying here who also believes it, and he's had experience with just this sort of thing." She frowned. "The FBI agent? You knew he was staying here?" "Well, yeah, he has his weapon, and when we checked in, he was good enough to inform us of that, as well as furnish his badge number so we could verify his identity." "Which you did? Standard procedure. Somebody walks in here carrying a gun, I sure as hell want to know if they're legit. So yes, I personally called to verify Agent Hayes' identity." She frowned again. "Is this why he's here? Was he expecting to find skeletal remains in one of our gardens? Because I was told he was here on vacation, nothing more." "Call it a busman's holiday," Nate sighed. "Quentin was a kid staying here 25 years ago when that first little girl was murdered. He never forgot it, and it never sat right with him that the case went unsolved. The last 10 or 12 years he's been coming to Leisure pretty regularly, looking for whatever information he could find on that and the other deaths and disappearances possibly connected to the lodge." Shrugging, Nate added, "And so he's pretty much the expert on all this, carries the facts and details in his head." "Sounds like a man obsessed." "You could say that. I have." Stephanie nodded slightly. "He'll be helping you investigate this child's death? All the deaths and disappearances?" "Unofficially, although he's going to tap bureau resources to help us out with DNA and that sort of thing. The Leisure Police Department isn't really equipped to handle the kind of forensics work we're likely to need in investigating old crimes." "I see. Well, I understand the point you made earlier about keeping this investigation as quiet as possible. Needless to say, I agree with that, so I'll allocate a room for your interviews, and I'll make available to you those employees who are here during the time you're investigating. I assume you'll provide a list with the relevant dates?" "Of course," Nate responded, thinking of the busy night ahead of him. "All I ask in return," Stephanie continued, "is that you do keep your activities as low-key as possible and don't disturb my guests any more than you absolutely have to." "Agreed." "I assume you mean to start first thing in the morning?" Nate nodded. Jeremy Grant was in the ground out there for 10 years, so one more night isn't likely to change anything. The remains are on their way to the state medical examiner, so yeah, we'll get started on the interviews in the morning. Plainclothes, no uniforms. We will do our best not to disrupt your routines any more than necessary." "I appreciate that. And Agent Hayes?" "Agent Hayes will be approaching you for permission to go through old employee records and other paperwork stored here at the lodge. I'm asking that you grant that permission." She sighed. "I'll check with the owners, but under the circumstances, I'm sure they'll okay it." "Thank you." He got to his feet and was on the point of leaving her small office when he found himself hesitating. "Stephanie, I know this is not what you signed on for, and I'm sorry it's happening on your watch." She smiled slightly. "Don't worry about me, Nate. I'm an army brat. We learn early to cope with the unexpected." Nate was tempted, but in the end decided not to ask her if the unexpected included the paranormal. He'd find out the answer to that soon enough. They both would. "You don't understand." Diana's voice was rock steady in a way that only those holding on to control with teeth and fingernails could manage. I talked to him. I took his hand, and it was warm and solid, flesh and blood. He wasn't cold or wispy or any of the things a ghost is supposed to be. Quentin stirred an extra spoonful of sugar into the tea and then put the cup into her hands. "Drink this." She stared at the cup for a moment, then looked around her, frowning. The sitting room was surprisingly large and comfortable, occupying part of an open space that also included the kitchenette and a small dining table. Both the big sofa and the oversized chair in which she sat were plushly comfortable and were grouped along with a large square coffee table around a gas fireplace with a plasma TV placed above the mantel. "We're in my cottage." "Yes, it was closest. Drink the tea, Diana." "How long have we been here? Oh, Christ, I didn't black out, did I?" Which, Quentin thought, answered at least one of Bishop's questions. "Not as far as I could see," he said matter-of-factly, "but you're in shock, and no wonder. I'm told it takes quite a while for a medium to adjust." "I'm not a medium," but for the first time her protest was more defiant than certain. Again keeping his tone prosaic, even though what he was saying certainly wasn't, Quentin said, "You met and talked to Jeremy Grant, and he's been dead for 10 years. Either you're a medium or else you imagined the whole thing. I know damn well you didn't imagine it, at least partly because there's no way you could have known whose grave you had found. A hallucination. Probably wouldn't have given you his name, don't you think? Not the correct name, at any rate." She stared at him. "Drink the tea, Diana." After a moment, she took a sip of the steaming liquid and grimaced, either because it was so hot or because it was so sweet. "I don't remember coming here," she said finally. "Shock, like I said. After you told me you talked to Jeremy, you didn't say anything else. It seemed to me the best idea would be to get you inside, give you a little time to come to terms with all this." "I'm sure that cop had questions." "Oh, he has plenty." "Then I'll talk to you tomorrow." He and his people will be talking to everybody tomorrow, or at least everybody who is here or might know something about what happened to Jeremy Grant 10 years ago. "I don't know anything about that." "He didn't happen to mention how he died, huh?" She stared at him wonderingly. "No." "Yeah, they never do. My boss says it's the universe reminding us that nothing is ever easy." He took a sip of the coffee he had ordered for himself and added, "I think it sucks, though, frankly. I mean, you have this cool and scary ability to communicate with the dead, and they seldom tell you anything you couldn't figure out for yourself." Diana cleared her throat. "It doesn't seem quite fair," she agreed. "No, it's like most psychic abilities. They come along with limitations just as the other 5 senses do. Mine, for instance, never work when I need them to. I can't look into the future and see who's going to win the World Series this year, or if it's going to rain tomorrow, or even whether I'll be able to solve whatever case I'm working on at any given time. Hell, I can't even reliably predict the turn of a card. In fact, using tests developed years ago to measure psychic ability, I score below average." "Intent now," she said, "and yet you're psychic." "And yet," he agreed, "sometimes I just know things. They don't appear in my mind in neon, and I don't get visions. Sometimes I hear a faint whisper as though someone is telling me something. Other times I just know." "And you really believe that?" Quentin smiled at her. "Of course. I've seen and experienced too much in the last 25 years not to." 25 years. Since Missy died? He nodded. "You weren't psychic before then?" "I wasn't born an active psychic, no." He shrugged, keeping it as matter-of-fact as he could. "One theory is that most, if not all, humans have latent psychic abilities, unawakened senses, maybe left over from more primitive times when we needed that edge just to survive. Could be something we're evolving away from, since our survival as a species doesn't seem to depend on it." "Is that what you think?" "Not really. I think it's more likely that we're evolving toward the ability to more effectively use our brains. Maybe because of the increased levels of electromagnetic energy in the modern world. That's a viable theory." Diana nodded slowly. "Sounds like it." "Sure, it makes sense. Anyway, for most people, whatever extra latent senses they possess remain dormant and active. But for some of us, there's a trigger, usually early in life. An event of some kind that creates just the right electromagnetic spark in our brains to activate what lies dormant." "What sort of event?" she asked. "Traumatic, usually?" Physically, a severe injury or blow to the head, an actual electric jolt, or some kind of emotional or psychological shock. Which was it for you? The latter. Missy's murder? Only partly. He drew a breath, still finding it difficult to talk about even after all these years. The real shock came when I was the one to find her body.